Hello and welcome. We are so delighted to have all of you here today. I am Francie Crane, and before we begin, tomorrow, 3 years ago tomorrow, our nation, you will remember, suffered a very tragic loss. Let's share a moment of silence to recognize the triumph of the human spirit over great adversity, and in hopes for world peace. Thank you. As I said, we're so delighted to have you all here today. I am a recovering lawyer, a litigator, I confess, and currently a community volunteer, principally in the arts world. We have a vibrant arts community here in Houston. But mainly, I am a phoba. You know what a phoba is? It's a friend of Bill's and Andrea's. Now you know what a phobia is. That's our mayor, of course, and his wonderful wife. And don't we live in exciting times these days when, for instance, women voters will most likely determine who becomes our next president. And aren't we fortunate in Houston? Just last year, here in our city, in a nonpartisan mayoral race, people of all colors and religious backgrounds and political persuasions joined together to elect a truly excellent mayor. Now, many folks didn't realize when they voted for Bill and elected Bill that they really got Bill's secret weapon, and that is Andrea, his wife. Now, I take the fifth on how long I've known Andrea and Bill. I've known Andrea as a fine lawyer, a committed mother of three, a community volunteer in many areas, a prolific and highly imaginative writer, a mountain goat climber of Machu Picchu, and the truest of friends. She's really my Ann Landers and Dear Abby all rolled into one. Andrea White responds to every phone message, every email. She writes thank you notes. She writes her books and stories. She pays bills. She writes speeches. She helps her children with college applications. She goes to basketball camp with her youngest, and that's just for starters. In the gym, she can do leg presses double her weight, and she doesn't rest until it is completely and thoroughly done. Andrea is the most reliable person I have ever known. Now, the last is not my words. Those are of her husband. She's the most wonderful person I know, Andrea White.
Thank you, Francie. That was so sweet. I really appreciate your friendship and everything you've done for me. Francie has planned my first 12 months as Bill's wife. She gives me an event every month, and this is it this month. And I can't tell you how lucky I am to have such a good friend. Everyone from the Baker Institute has come by today to say, please be sure to thank Tracy Stein. She did everything on this event. And one by one, they came by to tell me that, and I agree, retired lawyers can accomplish anything, but I also want to say it takes some great leadership from the Baker Institute, which is what I see in the community. They are always giving credit to other people. And so Molly Hipp, Francois, Sonia, and we're so blessed to have Susan Baker, who's taken the time to be here. You know, thank you so much for hosting us and for doing so much great stuff in the community. I've been ashamed to talk to several of you who are so politically involved, and I thought I would share that when I was in college in 1974, I remember sitting in my apartment and a truck was going down my street and they were broadcasting my name, and they said, there's only one person who hasn't voted on this street, and it was me. And I really don't remember why I didn't vote, and I don't remember why I didn't go out then and vote, but I didn't. Much later, I got involved in helping a friend run for Congress, and I did some fundraising for him and enjoyed it. But it really wasn't until my husband ran for mayor that I got real involved in politics. And I started out very timid. I went on my first campaign walk, block walk, and I would, knock, 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 and if nobody answered, I would scurry away. And by the end of the campaign, I had gone to a huge beauty parlor that was the size of a city block and walked around from person to person with rollers in her hair, urging them to vote for my husband. So when the campaign started, I was terrified of public speaking, and I really didn't like to have my picture taken. So the best thing about the campaign for me and politics for me has been the personal growth. I have met so many wonderful people. I've worshiped in so many wonderful places of worship, and I've given up some fears, as I've described to you. And that's hard to do. So I'm here to tell you that the truth is that politics, just like any other volunteer commitment, you get so much more out of it than you give. And so go vote, get involved, care about an issue more than yourself, and great and unexpected things will happen to you. They happen to me. I'm living proof. So.
Well, a reminder, I guess not a reminder since you don't know yet. What we're going to do is eat after our speakers have spoken to us and after we've had some conversations for the floor. Yeah, I'm speaking to you. Put that sandwich up right now, okay? I am watching you like a hawk. Put it up. Don't break the rules. And if any of you see people violating that rule, please report them to me immediately. I want to echo Andrea's thanks to, of course, this wonderful treasure that we have here in Houston, the Baker Institute. And, Françoise Dirigian was very much involved in the creation of this idea. I had the great experience of meeting with Molly Hipp, who is such an asset here to the Baker Institute. They're so lucky to have her. Wonderfully bright, creative woman. And Françoise was so engaged in the issues that our speakers and the rest of you here are going to be addressing today. So, Françoise, thank you. Now, here's our game plan. Okay, this is in your program, but I am the facilitator. You thought I was just a recovering lawyer and a FOBA, but I am also the facilitator, and I'm mean because I'm a trial lawyer, so I'm going to enforce this. We have 5 terrific speakers, and they are going to speak for no more than 5 minutes each. Why no more than 5 minutes each? Because I will cut them off. I don't have a crooked cane, but I will act as the crooked cane. About 30 seconds before the end of that 5 minutes, I will come and stand near the speaker, and that's a warning, okay? But you will be cut off after that. Following each speaker, it will be open to questions, and those questions we hope will be directed to that speaker who will field the question. As you use your mics, they're wonderful mics that Baker Institute has provided right on each table. They're already on. But as you pick it up, just give the wonderful technicians here a beat or two to turn it up so that they can capture and we can all hear what you have to ask or to say. All right. After all of the above, then you'll get to finally enjoy that lunch that you're now just looking at. And the table hosts at each table will encourage and stimulate conversation. All right, so I practice what I preach. My introductions of these 5 speakers is going to be very, very brief each time. But your program, which was so beautifully prepared by Baker Institute, has a much fuller biography of the 5. So, without more conversation from me, I'll introduce briefly Dr. Carroll Quillin, our first speaker. Dr. Quillin is a Rice history professor who also teaches in the program for the study of women and gender, very relevant for us today. I've had the great fortune of talking to her by phone, and I know that you are going to be very interested in what Dr. Quillin has to say. Dr. Quillin.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all for coming. It's our privilege at Rice to have you here. I guess my experience with politics was a little bit different from Andrea's in that I grew up in a very small town and a small state, and although my father too was a lawyer by training, he loved politics, and he enlisted my sister and I from a very early age. Politics was just what we did. I think I did my first lit drop when I was 11, half of my uncle, for city council. I worked for a state senator and then a United States in high school. Politics was just what we did. Some people didn't, others traveled. Okay. In my family, what we did was campaign. But then I graduated from high school and I ended up at the University of Chicago, a place that prides itself on its detachment from the world. Nothing got past those Gothic gates that surrounded Chicago's campus. Nothing. And at Chicago, really, the only thing that mattered, and I mean the only thing, was thinking. Even our daily activities, going to the movies, getting a cup of coffee, going on a date, we talked about them more than we did them. We could analyze anything. We turned anything into a subject of debate. We analyzed our friendships. We analyzed our hobbies. We analyzed our daily activities more than we analyzed the books we were supposed to be reading for class. And anyway, these books that we were reading for class taught us to question everything. We read Plato's Republic and we wondered, well, is democracy good? Is monogamy good? Is exercise better when you're naked? We read Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir and we doubted the existence of God. We read Virginia Woolf and Adrienne Rich and we swore we would never depend on a husband like our mothers had for money. We questioned everything. Nothing was sacred. Nothing was out of bounds. Now, the most surprising thing to me, this political creature, about the university experience was that I loved it. I loved the bold, risky, no-holds-barred kind of thinking that you can do in a university and that is actually valued there. Instead of going to law school, as I had always planned, I went to graduate school. Instead of becoming a politician, I became a historian. But while I was at college, in the midst of all that questioning, I took a course on ancient Athens. It was here in this class that I learned that our word politics, of course, comes from the Greek word for city. More importantly, I learned what politics really is, and why, even as an ivory tower professor who reads dusty 15th century manuscripts, I would always be political. You see, to the Greeks, politics is the quintessential human activity. It's the thing that makes us different, because out of all living creatures, only we human beings get to decide how we're going to live. We build our own world. We decide what kind of institutions we want to have, and we create them. We decide what matters most to us, what is true and what is just and what is right, and we build a world to bring that about. We can write laws and decide how they are enforced. We choose how our collective resources will be allocated, and we as a community decide how we will defend ourselves. This is politics. It is the noble arena in which we as free and thinking people decide what kind of world we together are going to create. Thinking, I learned, has everything to do with it. This new understanding of politics as a central human obligation led me back to it. and to campus activism. By now it was the mid-'80s, and I was at Princeton, which, you know, is a pretty posh place. I knew who was paying for my education, the Mellon Foundation. But who was paying for everything else? Who was paying for the buildings and the grass? And who paid the professors' salaries? Who paid for the books in the libraries that we studied? Turned out that Princeton, like most American universities at that time, held investments in companies that did business in South Africa, which then was governed by the brutally racist system of apartheid. Wait, we said, our university profits from apartheid? But we are thinking people striving to be just. We don't want to live in a world where some people suffer from racist oppression, and we certainly don't want to profit from it. How can we allow this to persist? We want to support those who lay their lives on the line in South Africa for freedom and justice. To us, this was a cause worth defending. We stood up for it, got arrested for it, and through that, I think we honored in a very small way the brave heroes in South Africa who brought apartheid to an end. This is campus activism. This is why politics belongs in the university. The conception of politics that I learned from the Greeks still underlies what I do as a scholar, as a teacher, as a Houstonian, as an American, and as a human being. And I think that conception of politics is the inspiration behind this institute. To be political is to be human. It is to exercise the uniquely human capacity to choose what kind of world we want to live in. So when I hear now, as I so often do, something that I've said dismissed on the ground that it's politically motivated, my answer is yes. Yes, it's politically motivated, and I'm proud of that. Thank you.
That was just wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Quillin.
I didn't even notice you standing there.
Well, I know. And it was so beautiful that I wasn't quite as good as I should have been about the time, in which case I'm going to cut our questions a few minutes short here on this. But I'm opening up the questions now for Dr. Quillin. Please, as you're thinking about some questions here, I want to say I was a little bit chagrined because I remembered my college days. They were very different from that of Carroll's. I was at the University of Texas during the Vietnam War. And as you know, or you've read about, most of you in books, that was a time of that was greatly tempestuous on the campuses, and the University of Texas as well. But I was very different. I was not engaged. And inaction is also political action. But I look back on that, and I so wish I had been involved in the middle of that extremely important debate. So, please, questions for Dr. Quillin. Andrea.
Did you have to go to jail?
Well, did you have to go to jail?
Getting arrested in Princeton, New Jersey is not, like getting arrested in, say, in New York or a big city. We did, in fact, go to jail. It was a very small space. There wasn't enough room for the 120 of us who were there. It was, but to us it mattered to stand up for something that we thought was right, and to acknowledge our own implication in structures that were, to us, really wrong. We were, in fact, benefiting from something that we viewed as wrong. And we felt it important to acknowledge that rather than to pretend that because we were in a university, we were somehow protected or isolated from that and from that obligation. So we were arrested, but it was, was not your typical arrest experience, I don't think.
Has anyone here ever been involved in a protest? So maybe some experiences about that. Tracy, you had a question?
I was going to ask a question.
Take your mic, and yes, if everyone will, so everyone can hear the question.
I was going to ask Dr. Quillin a question about activism on the Rice campus, other than whether the football team was kept or not. But have you seen it, and are there opportunities for that kind of political expression?
Probably the people who are best equipped to answer that question who are here are the Rice students who who themselves organize a variety of groups that participate in many different issues that are politically important, both in our city and nationally and internationally. So there's ample opportunity for students at Rice, and I'm sure everywhere, and at University of Houston, and also, TSU and all universities, really in the country, probably, ample opportunities to get involved. I think Rice students are overworked, as many college students are, but they do find time for the things that matter to them. So, but I think, again, students would be better equipped to answer that question than I would.
Yes.
Is this on? Yes. Okay. I'm just curious if you think there are any issues that parallel the apartheid supporting our American universities now, if you think there are things that we should be active about or aware of that we aren't.
I think it's important for those of us who benefit from the university environment to understand it as an institution that exists within a broader context, and to be aware of the ways in which we benefit from that context. I think what inspired it was really a divestment movement. It was a movement to encourage universities to sell their stock, was the realization that we were directly benefiting from business being conducted in a country that was, profoundly unjust. And are there such situations now? Yes, because universities exist in a world that still suffers from injustice. Whether or not those situations are draw you in is something that's up to you.
Yes. By the way, just grab your mic and ask the question. I appreciate it. You're not waiting back.
I had a question on what do you feel that protesting actually solves? I've never personally protested, but I just had that question.
Well, first, I think I would echo what Andrea said, in that it's very, protesting can take a variety of forms. I think acting politically is empowering. It makes me feel that I have a right to express my view. I can find a venue in which my expression of that view will be heard. And for that, I will, feel like I'm not excluded or silenced. And I think those are important things to feel personally. In terms of strategic protesting, that's a decision that that depends on the context. I mean, I think you need to plan whatever political activity you want to engage in around the thing that you're trying to change, and that just varies. I mean, the kind of campus we were protesting on a campus about a campus policy, and we didn't leap to breaking the law. We repeatedly asked for meetings with the administration. We actually got a better response from the Board of Trustees, who did meet with us, than the administration. We built symbolic shanty towns on the campus that the administration kept tearing down. So it was a complicated process, and our breaking the law was a symbolic gesture to request dialogue, right? I mean, we said, we're going to blockade this building for 6 hours because we really need you to talk to us. You can't just pretend like we're not here. So it was a way of getting attention. And it was we were, committed, obviously, to peaceful activity. There was no, and so I think in that sense, we did get their attention, and so that, I would say that, there's no point in just breaking the law for its own sake or protesting for its own sake, but there are times when strategically planned protests can call attention to something that is being ignored by those with the power to change it.
And I would say, before we go to our next speaker, that, political action, without a doubt, including protests of certain types, can and has effected change for the good. In my personal experience, it's important when one is politically active, as it is in most things, to keep, as it is in all things, not most things, to keep an open mind, though, and be able to listen to the other side at the same time. Don't close your own mind and your own heart doing it. So let's go to our next speaker, who I am standing right behind. Now, I know this woman, and she is also a recovering lawyer, and also, like Andrea, a mother of 3. Sharia is currently the executive director of the Joint City-County Commission on Children, and she knows of what she works, for sure, and she is simply wonderful. Sharia McKenzie.
Thank you, Francie. Can you all hear me? I'm going to have mic problems because they told me to put it in my pocket, but I went to the restroom and found that it made my hips look even bigger, so it's not going in the pocket, it's going here on the table. And sound people just deal with it. I really want to pick up on the point where Carroll kind of left out. We had met earlier in the week to talk about our personal experiences, and everyone was kind of historical, so I went back and kind of went back into my history and said I'd talk a little bit about that. And I really started off with my parents, who had been very active in the Montgomery bus boycotts and who had gone to the Alabama State College for Negroes and who were victimized by segregation, who were very, very adamant about protest and changing situations. Now, growing up, they never missed an election, and oftentimes I would ask them, you know, why is it such a big deal? And they said, you will know when you don't have the right to vote. Okay, so you have the right to vote is such an important right. So I watched them vote as we grew up. I watched them support particular candidates. I watched them do things that really affected change, because they were really more into system change than they were into getting people elected. I mean, they want people elected because they would get the power to make the changes. So we did that. They were very much into, you know, academia and education, and so that became very important. At any rate, I went on to college at Fisk University, which was in Nashville, Tennessee, historically black university. And I had gone back and forth through to the South, because we grew up in Michigan. And but it was a different experience, even the voting experience, when you went into a society that had been inherently segregated. And so there was a different tenor when it came to election time. But even in college, though, I wasn't voting. I remember I went to get my driver's license, and in Michigan, you could automatically register to vote. And I was like, oh, never mind. I don't really stay here during the year anyway. And so they didn't chastise me, the person behind the counter, nor did my parents. So I went through college being somewhat active. I protested all kinds of things. I had opinions, but I wasn't exercising my right to vote. And it wasn't until I came to Houston to go to law school. And actually, I had graduated from law school. Again, in law school, I was active on campus. I was, you know, stayed abreast of current events and so forth. But I had gotten out of law school, and I was working for then Congressman Mickey Leland. And we were doing this big voter turnout deal. And I had gone downtown to the Harris County administration building, and a gentleman was there, Mr. Moses Leroy. And he had to be, he wasn't 100, but he must have been 98, okay? And he stood up very difficultly, because his wife, who was like twice his size, was behind him, and then somebody had to hold him, who's super, super feeble. And I was like, let me say, I just got out of law school. I was like 24, and I'm sitting there, and I was like just listening to him, and I'm passing out cards, and he said, I can't remember his entire speech, but once he started speaking, he didn't need a mic. It was super powerful, but he started with, the right to vote is an incredible right. It is the most important right. And I felt myself, I get kind of emotional whenever I think about it, because it really touched me. And I really don't remember the rest of the speech. It was very powerful. But while I was still somewhat cynical, which is why I think I didn't vote before, I'm not a hypocrite. And so I, at that point, got deputized, you know, registered myself, of course, and then started registering people and got really involved in the whole voting process. Because voting, you know, again, if you don't do anything else, I think that that is something that's very easy to do. It's almost too easy. We take it for granted. I know one of my friends went for the liberation of South Africa, and she went down, and it was an African-American female lawyer, and she was so excited because she said to watch people who had actually traveled for more than a week to come to the polls was such an incredible experience. And so voting is very, very important. But then other forms of activism are important also. What I presently do, because everybody also told me, tell what you do, because I have a really nebulous title. Executive Director of the Joint City-County Commission on Children. Sounds big and it sounds long, and it is important. But I'm not like a New York commission. I can't close anybody down. I can prop you up, but I can't really close you down. But what we are really is a policy body. And what we do is research, and we advise elected officials and business leaders, civic activists, on policies that affect the systemic well-being of children. There's a person in town, Angela Blanchard, who's the executive director of Neighborhood Centers, which is very big and very powerful and can close you down. But she says to me that my mission is so broad that if a child on Mars is in need, I need to, beam myself up there and make sure they're okay. And not quite that broad, but, we really are involved with the well-being of children. And why that's important for me and why it's an activism for me and it's an expression of political will is because that allows me, Francie's coming towards me, that allows me to really affect change on a daily basis. And it makes me able to exercise some of my talents, one of which is talking too long, but even more importantly, the things that I like to do in the community. My husband always jokes when I took this job, and I said, I'm really not going to practice anymore. He's like, you have a good practice, you're at the top of your game, which is when you want to make a transition, I might add. But he said, but this is the stuff you like to run around and do anyway, so you might as well do it as a profession. And so that's what leads me to you all today.
Thank you so much, Sharia.
Do you want me to be seated?
And isn't it true that you take for granted what is easy, this right to vote that is sacred, that so many in this world do not have? So boy, that was so appropriate. Questions. And I want you to be the first to ask questions. I didn't tell you, but I should have. This is a safe place for you all to ask questions. No one is grading or critiquing. No one is reporting what you say to some secret agency. So please ask. So often when I'm thinking about questions, I think, I want them to be really smart. They don't have to be. It's what's on your mind. That will make for a lively discussion. So yes, you be the first. Be safe.
Is it on?
It is.
Okay.
Put it closer to you.
Oh, okay. I'm an education major, and I understand your passion for children. Now, at the beginning of your speech, you talked about your experience with segregation. I just wanted to ask you, what is your opinion about HISD in particular, trying to open the school for immigrant children? What do you think the effect of that's going to be, not only on them, but on the people surrounding that community in Houston itself?
What a question. Okay, I mean, that's a good question. Let me say this. I don't have, when I say I have experience with segregation, my parents, that was their life. We grew up, 1,000 miles from our grandparents, so we wouldn't have to deal with that, okay? So there's some power in their logic, and I have faith in them. I believe that people should have the opportunity to go any and everywhere that they want to. I believe that's what makes you comfortable. I believe that's what makes me able to walk into the Baker Institute and, run my mouth, okay? There are people that if you're in a cloistered environment for so long, you're not able to go in and connect. That's something that I work personally with some of my other volunteer projects. I'm really into trying to bring children out of their comfort zone. And unfortunately, when you stigmatize children, be it immigrant children, minority children, Caucasian children who, grow up in situations where they never come into contact with a person of color or a person of a different socioeconomic background, then it is to their detriment. And so for that reason, I do have serious concerns about the model, although I believe that the intention is good. I have found there's, Anne Frank says that said that, you know, she believes people are good at heart. And I still believe that, and that might be Pollyannish. So I do believe that the intention is good. I'm not sure that is the proper mechanism to achieve the desired outcome.
Yes.
Sure. You know, so many of the young people, when I used to teach in classes, would respond that voting is ineffective, that it doesn't change anything. Given the fact that the United States has one of the lowest rates of voter participation in the industrialized world, why do you think that perception seems to be so prevalent among young people, that voting doesn't really change anything? And why do you think it still matters?
Well, the reason I think that it's persistent among young people is because of the current school structure. Because I believe that you learn from your environment. We're dealing with a situation, I'll put on my kind of lawyer hat now. The American Bar Association is doing a lot of research on zero tolerance and what its effect has been on students, not only students of color and poor students, which have been disproportionately affected, but now we'll see that middle-class students are also being categorized in manners and ways in which their parents are finding it unacceptable. I go to zero tolerance, which is very extreme, but just to illustrate that when a child is not allowed to feel a sense of full citizenship or belonging within an institution, and that's what happens with many of our schools. When I walk into schools to make speeches, and you know, the children are not engaged, there is no opportunity for them to have open forum, there is no dialogue between they and their teachers and the administration, that sets a groundwork, in my opinion, for them to become alienated and disenfranchised as they grow older. And then when you say come into the broader context of the world and your vote matters, hey, it never has heretofore. So then you've got to start from ground zero. That's my opinion as to one of the implications. How you overcome that really is to try consistently to put out that message that, one, voting matters. But again, back to Dr. Quillin's point, activism matters too. Having some position. I went through a good, you see, I could vote when I was 18. I didn't register until I was 24. Okay, so I went through those years where I was still active, but I wasn't voting. But I finally came, you know, again, when you're young, that's the beauty of being young, you know, you can think all these things through and carry them out in your mind. I had to wait until things aligned for me. And if some things you cannot be taught or shown, some things you have to experience and see for yourself. I remember the instant that my eyes were opened and that I knew that I couldn't go forward because my vote did matter. And if I was making other people really believe that, then I had to.
Did you have a back in the back?
Yes, I do have a question. I think sometimes being in college, you know, school, sometimes work, lots of activities go on. Sometimes you find yourself going, oh, what's going on in the news? You know, sometimes you just find yourself in this little world. But we had a voters registration a couple of weeks ago on campus. People came out to speak, and a lot of my girlfriends, they made the comment, I want to be active on a local level, but how do I find out all the things that are going on? Because, you know, we really don't have all this time to go and research and dedicate because we're still doing so much on campus already. What is your advice for these young women that want to get involved in a local level and know what's going on without having to research in depth?
You just imagine it without the internet. Okay, just imagine how. I mean, this is the thing that's so you know, I love the internet. My husband, for years, I wouldn't deal with it. My husband's like, it's made for you. People that love to research. It's difficult, okay, and you almost have to seriously dedicate some time to. And with your friends, I mean, you almost have to divide and conquer. You know, one thing about getting older, and as you get even older and older, you do learn that you have to rely on other people. I mean, I think all of us, I know myself, Andrea, who I've known for years, and Francie as well, you go through that little point in your time where you feel so invincible, and you think you can be a mother and be a lawyer and be a wife and be an activist and do this and that and a writer and all this, and you realize, yeah, you can, but you're going to have to temper some of it. And it's the same thing with finding out information. You've got to dialogue with people that are in the know. You might have to divide it. Somebody, let you do this week, you find out what's happening next week. And then the other thing is just pick up the phone sometime and call around to either the various political offices, if you want to do it from a partisan standpoint. If you want to do it with regard to children's issues, you can call the Children's Defense Fund. They always have something that's going on they can advise. You can call my office, 713-247-1386. And my staff is instructed to try and help anybody that calls us for any reason. And there are people in this room that can attest to that.
And by the way, that is a very good question that was just asked. And today you have lots of resources in this room, including at your tables. And so please pose that question again. And I think you are going to get some very specific responses of ways that you might help and avenue and things to pursue. It is often issue specific, what you're interested in about that. It may not just revolve around a candidate or a campaign. It may be, as Sharia was saying, around issues. But ask that question again when we have our table conversations. That was an excellent question. Yes, and last question, right here.
I'm involved with Rice for Choice, which is a pro-choice organization on campus, and we're getting ready to hold some voter registration drives on campus and in the Houston community. And one major concern I have that I've heard voiced from people, in particular individuals my age, is the perception that because of the way our voting system is structured, where it's not direct vote and it is through the Electoral College, depending on where you live, technically some people would say that your vote doesn't count. For example, if you're a Democrat in Texas, it's going to go to George Bush, so why should I come out and vote if it doesn't really matter? And so I'm wondering if you have a response, something that we could say to people that voice this concern.
It's not just people your age. Sue Schechter's in the room, and I know she had this conversation with somebody a couple nights ago because I was at dinner with them. Your vote does matter if for no other reason than an exercise of personal choice. So that it may not go the way you envisioned it. And it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. But the point is that you have weighed in. Okay, you've let yourself be heard, and that's what's personally empowering. There have been times that, and it's not just in political elections or in partisan elections, there are times even in your school elections, that you'll find state bar elections, you'll go vote for the underdog. We have to do bar polls, and sometimes I'll vote for that person who I know isn't going to win, but who's really just a bang-up, smash-up lawyer who's always had a small practice and no name ID. But you just do it because that's what's in your heart and your soul, and you've exercised that. I promised them they didn't have to get the hook on me. You said she's putting me in this headlock.
Thank you so much.
Francie.
Yes, thank you, Sharia. And by the way, an issue for y'all to be thinking about is the wisdom or not of the Electoral College, a very current and topical issue and an important issue. So just a thought. Next, we are so fortunate to have with us the Honorable Martha Wong. Martha, if you'll stand up. Martha is small in stature but giant in our city and state and at heart. Martha was a long time Houston City Council member. We're so lucky to have had her in that position here in this city. And currently, the state and city are fortunate to have her as a member of the Texas House of Representatives representing District 134. Martha, your talent and vision devoted to our city and state makes them so much better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today, and I want to thank Andrea for setting this up and moving forth with it. I think it's a great opportunity for young women to find out about how you can impact your life today and in the future, and I think it's very important. I have lived the American dream, the immigrant American dream. I have done it so you can do it. I have done it so you can do it. My parents came from China. They came to the United States. My father was here as a young boy, went back to China because he learned English so well that his father wanted him to remember Chinese, so he sent him back to China. And he learned Chinese, married my mother, came to the States, and somehow ended in the state of Mississippi. Now, this is in the 1930s. In the 1930s, which some of you were not even alive then, but some of us were, there was what we call segregation. And in those days, the white children went to certain schools, and the African-American children went to other schools. There were even such things as, to some of you who have never heard this word, African-American people could only go to certain restaurants or couldn't even go to some restaurants. And Anglo people could go wherever they wanted to. My sister was becoming of age then, and I wasn't born. And my father, in the city in which they were living, in the city of Rouville, my sister could not go to the white school, and she could not go to the African-American school. So my father was in a dilemma and decided that he would come to Texas where she could go to school. There was still segregation here, but they had heard that the Chinese children could go to the white schools. And so my father brought the family to Houston, Texas. When he came, it was still segregation here. It was 1938. He could not rent an apartment because he was Chinese, and they could see that very clearly when they knocked on the door. And they could not rent a house, but they could rent a grocery store. And so they rented a grocery store, and our family lived in the back of that grocery store, in the storeroom, which was about half the size of this room, for about the first 5 years of my life. I was born a year later after they came to Houston. And so all I knew as a child growing up, I never thought of myself as poor, but we lived in that little room. We had our beds in there. We had one table in there, one chair, and a stove. There was a sink in there. The one chair was reserved for my father. When we ate dinner, everyone had to eat dinner at the same time, but my father got the chair. The rest of us had to sit on apple crates. And in those days, apple crates were made out of wood, and if you turned them up the long way, then it was high enough for you to sit at the table and eat. And so that's the beginnings of my life. I graduated through the Houston Independent School District and went to the University of Texas. At the University of Texas, I became involved in a number of service organizations, and I became the president of one of them, and then went on to, I guess there are no UT people here, but a lot of UTXs here, and went to Spooks, and I went on to Orange Jackets and to Mortarboard. So my whole life while I was at the University of Texas was about service. But before there, when I was in high school, it was also about service. We joined a number of organizations, and luckily I grew up in what I thought at that time was a really integrated society, but it was not. But I felt no prejudice against Martha Wong at that time because my family was a stable part of that community, and we were accepted in that community. Finally, one day, though, my father was able to buy a house, but the only way he could buy that house was to have one of his customers buy the house and then sell it to him. Today I was just at the Retired Teachers Association, and one of the teachers there used to be my father's customer. And it was a wonderful time to visit with her and for her to tell me about my father. I know about that grocery store because I worked there all through junior high school into college. And when I came home from the University of Texas on weekends, I worked at the grocery store. I was the checker. I could also sack groceries. I could also count cans on the store during inventory time. And I used to sweep the floors. And I'm going to tell you, my cousin who lived with us and worked in the store thought I was so stupid because I did not sweep right. And he says, you're sweeping the trash towards your feet. You're supposed to sweep it away. And so I learned how to sweep floors in the grocery store too. I go on to tell you that I got married, had 3 children, was an elementary school teacher. and got somewhat involved politically as I got older, and we were in a neighborhood where I had friends who were running for public office. I helped one of my friends get elected to the Houston City Council. And then after I helped him get elected and had sent out cards just to tell people, vote for my friend. And what I did is I took my church mailing list, my church directory, and found all the people in his area and wrote them a card and told them to vote for them. From there, I became a city council member, and now I'm representing the state of Texas at the House. You are sitting in District 134. You can come and work in my campaign. I had Rice students working in my campaign 2 years ago. We are at the corner of Richmond and Kirby, which is down the street, and we are block walking this Saturday and this Sunday afternoon, so I encourage all of you to do that. Being a part of a campaign gives you pride in that you have helped to elect someone that you know and that you've worked with. That's my phone. They're probably telling me to come to something else. But I want you to know I've also been an activist, and I always teach my constituents to be activists because I think that's very important. I have marched with signs to prevent men's clubs. I have marched with signs to prevent billboards. And I do that because I believe in those causes. And so I encourage you as a young person to get active, to learn to be a part of society. And I don't think that voting is just a privilege. I believe it's your responsibility. If you are a citizen of the United States, you should vote. It's your responsibility to keep this nation alive. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, as you can see, we're so lucky to have Martha Wong with us, and I know you have many questions, so kick it off.
This is to piggyback on that last comment and also from the last speaker. There's been a lot of emphasis on voting, and yet I find when I speak with a lot of people, they're so uninformed on issues and on the candidates that sometimes I wish they wouldn't vote because they're actually voting for the wrong candidate for their views. And so where do you stand on that issue of having uninformed people vote?
Well, I'm going to share with you that most candidates nowadays do have websites, and so it's very easy to go to their websites and learn about their issues. Many years ago, when people ran for public office, each person would develop what you'd call a white paper and talk about the issues that they were going to put forth. We don't issue white papers anymore, but on our websites, we normally put the issues that we're concerned about, what we're going to do, our history, our lives, everything. When you are an elected official, your life is wide open to everything, as Andrea knows, and as Sue Schechter knows, because I am in the position that Sue Schechter once held. And everybody can learn everything about Martha Wong that they want to know. They know how much money I make. They know how many bonds I own. They know how much my house is worth. So anything you want to find out about somebody, you can. And so that information is there for you. I would go to websites and see. When you see people running for public office, the best thing to do right now is to go to the two parties and see who's running for what office. Then you can go to their websites and find out about those candidates.
And that's such a good question. Just before you do, a really and a beautiful answer as well. Another thing to do is you can help inform yourself. I mean, not only yourself, but others. And an idea that I heard just today is people are having parties when we start having these presidential, and I think there'll be at least one vice presidential debate. I say party, gatherings. You know, invite your friends over who you'd like to be better informed. Not just to preach to the choir, don't just whip each other into a frenzy, but maybe get somebody of the other persuasion over. You know, so that, you know, together you can watch that.
Also, we are having, I'm coming to speak at this campus as a candidate, so you can look for me to come and speak, and I'm sure other people are coming to speak too.
Yes, other questions? I thought.
On our campus, they encourage a lot of students to vote, as I believe they do on other campuses. But I know a lot of students who usually just when they go vote, they vote for a name that looks nice, or they're not really, serious about it. Do you believe that those students who are not truly serious about politics, that they shouldn't vote at that time? Should they wait, or are they still encouraged to still go vote?
I would encourage you to vote, and you need to go in there and to look at that. I know a lot of people do look at names. We know in the political world that someone has to see your name 12 times before they even recognize it on a ballot. So that's why we put yard signs out there. That's why we deliver mail to your home. I mean, that's why, we try to put that name out there. And when you see those names out there, it's your responsibility to go and learn about those people. But I think it's very important. If you feel like you cannot make a choice, then go in there. There's not just one name or one office that people are running for. There are a number, so you can at least make some choices about some of them.
Claire, the wonderful student next to me, just said, it's always safe to vote for a woman.
Good point.
Okay. One more question before we go. Yes.
I heard you mention that you started off as an elementary school teacher, and that's what I plan on going into. However, I didn't hear you mention anything about going into law, so I wanted to know, how did you make the transition from being an elementary school teacher to a politician?
Good question. And I'll tell you, I was an elementary school teacher. I was an elementary school principal. I became an associate superintendent under Billy Reagan. And a lot of you won't know him, but Billy Reagan was a superintendent in HISD about 20 years ago. And he said that he taught me everything there was to know about politics. It was really a friend ran for public office and asked me to help him, and so I did. And then when that friend got elected, and other people started asking me to support them and to help them get elected. And so I did that. I wrote postcards and told people to vote for them and called them up and all that good stuff. Then we decided, a number of Asians decided, because no Asian had ever been elected to the Houston City Council until I ran. And so a group of us, but we had always supported candidates, okay? And so we were dishing out our money to different candidates and not getting a darn thing for the Asian community. We did not have one Asian on any board. There was not an Asian assistant police chief. The police department would only allow 5 Asians to be allowed on the police department at that time. So we decided we'd get together and support one candidate, and we did that. And then we decided the next year to run a candidate, and the Asian person that was going to run went out. The third year, we decided we'd run candidates again, and I was chosen. So I ran and I won, and that's how it happened. Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. She is the immigrant's dream, and doesn't Martha Wong epitomize how much our immigrant population enriches this country? Thank you so much. Some of the great questions that have been asked, just something that really does, is a piece of information that's worth consulting too, is the Houston Chronicle does come out with a voter's guide. So something to put in your hopper as you're considering for whom you'll vote. All right, Amy Jaffe is our next speaker. Amy, if you'll stand. Amy, right there, is an energy policy guru who you're likely to find on any given day quoted in the New York Times or perhaps the Wall Street Journal. And the Baker Institute is fortunate to have Amy as the Wallace S. Wilson Fellow for Energy Studies. Amy.
Thanks very much, Francie. In listening to the discussion and hearing of all the political activism of all the speakers, and having myself be a person with a very strong personality, as my interns and other researchers who are here know, it's embarrassing to tell all of you that I've never actually been politically active. I mean, I've always voted. Since the day I could vote, I voted. But I've never been in a protest. I've never helped a candidate for office. I've never been in what people call traditional politics. And it's not because my background didn't encourage it. My mother, I grew up in a very small town outside of Boston. We were 3,000 people in the town, and we had a town meeting system. Now, I know you all see town meetings on TV with the President Clinton or President Bush, but in Massachusetts, the town meeting system functions instead of city council. People from the town run from different groups, and everybody comes into a big hall, and there's just debate on issues having to do with the town. And my mother was a town meeting member, and she used to drag me along when she had an important issue, when she thought she might speak. She wanted me to see her speak on those issues. And I will tell you that when I was a child, my brother and I used to go butterfly catching at the pond down the street from her house. And my most happy memories are running around that pond with a little net trying to catch a butterfly. You can imagine my mother having these two adorable little children running around with a net. Must have been, not knowing her, that probably was like a highlight for her, watching us running through the grass thinking we might catch a monarch, which was the big prize. And a developer decided that that pond was a great place to put an apartment building. It was right on the ocean where we lived. Perfect setting, guy could make a lot of money. And he decided that he would buy up that property from the institution that owned it. And there was going to be a town meeting about his plan. And my mother and some of the other women from the neighborhood who were her generation, nobody worked. Everybody played cards. Actually, the truth is my mother was a special ed teacher, but the other ladies played cards. And they all decided that this pond was a critical part of the neighborhood. And so my mother got up at town meeting, and she explained why this pond was a critical part of Swampscott, Massachusetts. And the other ladies from the neighborhood, who were also town meeting members, got up and explained why this pond was a critical part of Swampscott, Massachusetts. And I'm proud to tell you today that when I take my children home, which I just did in August, to visit my mother, we go down and play at that pond, because it's still there. So that was my first exposure to politics, was watching my mother stand up and tell off everybody else in the town. And then I went to college and was not really all that active on campus, but was interested in going into politics. And in the great tradition of pulling the string, my father happened to play squash with the head of the Massachusetts State Senate, and so he got me a job as an intern in the State House in Boston. And I spent the summer there, and I thought, God, this isn't for me. This is just not for me. I don't like the feeling of people coming and the protesters, and people aren't making decisions on the basis of what's right. People are making decisions on who donated to their campaign and who do they have to cater to in their communities, and they're not doing the right thing. And that bothered me, that people were voting in a way that they privately knew was not the right thing. And that completely turned me off. Though I must say to all of you, because I'm sure some of you were skeptics here in the group, I never stopped voting. But it bothered me. It bothered me that people didn't vote their conscience, right? And I thought, it's not for me, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something totally different. And there I was, you know, junior in university, realizing I'm not going to law school, I'm not going into politics, what in the world am I going to do, right? And so I wound up sort of, I didn't know. So you have to ask yourself, what skills do you have? You know, what skills do you have here to make it in the world, right? And I was a good writer. I was a very good writer. And now, for all of you who like get started late, this will be an encouraging story. I thought, well, okay, I could be in journalism. I'm a good writer. I like political issues. I could influence people by writing about issues. And I was actually very interested in the Middle East. I was interested in the Middle East for a variety of different reasons. I was interested in the Middle East because I sat in gasoline lines with my father in 1973. I was interested in the Middle East because I'm Jewish, and peace in the Middle East was an important goal to me, right? I was interested in the Middle East because in my day, all the money in the world seemed to be flowing to the Middle East, and people were worried about how that money was going to be spent and what that was going to mean for national security and international security. And so I came out to be a writer, writing about the Middle East to help inform people. And I liked your question about should people vote, or is it bad if people vote if they're uninformed? And there's an activism that's an opportunity. Not everybody is a sort of marching around the street, knocking on doors, you know, holding a placard type of person. Some people really like to sit at a desk or be by themselves or read a book or do something a little quieter. But there are a lot of things that people need to be informed about to vote correctly, as you said, to make an informed choice, to choose to vote for someone because you like what they say on a subject. How can you know about that subject if you don't, that's not your area of expertise? That's where it comes in to being involved in public policy, in writing op-eds for the newspaper, in going to student forums and asking questions and informing yourself on topics that you think are important to you and important to your local community or your national community or the international community. And that is really where I find myself involved in politics. My particular field now, having studied Arabic and learning about the Middle East, of course, is to know a lot about oil. And so I try to help the public understand the complicated issues surrounding our use of fuel.
And there are so many of them. I mean, that's such an important and topical issue, and so many political decisions being made on energy issues every day, Amy. That's quite right. Questions for Amy. And thank you, Amy, so much. We're so lucky to have her. Questions for Amy. Right there. Great.
I have a question, actually, because it was always stressed in my family, my home. My mother grew up in the same situation, whereas originally the right to vote was not there. So that was an important thing for her. Every year they always went to vote. They took me with them. So when I turned 18, the first thing I did was register to vote. And before I turned 18, actually, I registered to vote so that I could vote in the first election. And my concern is, as far as political activism goes, is I notice a complacency in the university system, university level, especially I think in more minority students, women, and minority in regards to race and ethnicity. It becomes almost a comfort zone to where it's kind of a facade that there's diversity and equal rights and that things are on a more level platform now, but it is in that sense more of a facade, and I don't know what I can do to sort of help students become more active or help them to notice that there are issues out there that aren't being addressed, or notice that there are issues that they can become involved in and to actually make a change. I think that in our society, we're a little more lax as far as issues go, and I don't know what I can do to help students say, hey, that's an issue and we can protest just like they did and we can make changes as well.
Well, you know, I have to tell you, I love your question. And I love your question because I took one of my interns with me to a meeting last summer, and we were in a meeting and I was the only woman there. There's, 10, 15 people there from campus. And we were all kicking about ideas, and I can be very forceful if I have an idea I think is right, and so in the end the group adopted my idea and we all left. And the student turned to me on the way back down here to the office. She said, I've never seen a woman do that. I've never seen a woman talk in a meeting. And that's amazing that you got those 15 men to agree to what you said. And that bothered me. That bothered me that she even noticed that. It bothered me that that should be an issue. It should just be there were 16 people in the room and one of them had a good idea, right? But indeed, here on the Rice campus and in society in general, we do have rights. And if you don't exercise those rights, you don't have to be, violent, but if you assert your rights, I'm in a classroom, I'm going to answer the question if I know the answer. Professor doesn't call on me, and I think that he might not be calling on me because he has an idea in his head about who should be called on and who shouldn't. He's only calling on the men in my class. If I were in that class when I was your age, you know what I used to do? I used to speak out without being called on. Right? It's a true story, ladies. I have this joke now that when I go to meetings now, I have to constrain myself because for years, the way I was heard, I would be at the Council of Foreign Relations to some of these fancy institutions. They were not going to call on a young woman, especially not in the oil industry. So I used to cut people off and interrupt. Now, I know that's very rude, and it's probably not something we say down here in the South, but the point is that it worked. Because once I was speaking, if I had something to say, then people were engaged in what I had to say, right? So I'm not telling you that you should be rude, but it is important for you to be a presence. Your ideas about how young women on this campus or minority people on this campus should act, by setting your own example and behaving that way, you give other people the confidence to speak in class. You give other people the confidence to come out and say, we don't like the XYZ policy and we'd like to bring a petition to the president, right? It's by setting that example, by doing it yourself and sticking your neck out a little yourself, that you make it easier for other people to do that.
Great question to talk about at your tables, too. How can you be heard effectively, you know, as a woman, as a minority, as a person who wants their viewpoint to be understood? One more question. Yes?
I have a question for you, well, based on the energy side of it. Since energy is such a big issue in determining, you know, when an election is coming up, what do you think? Do you think that's necessary? Do you think it should be the case? Do you think the reserves should be tapped into? Do you think we need to depend on someone else? Do you think it should be made, like, do you think there are other issues that...
Thank you.
Okay. Do you think there are other issues that require, you know, attention than making energy, you know, a big hurrah?
Well, you know, I think that energy is really related to a lot of different issues, and that is why I think you see the candidates talk about it, and it is why I think it's a very important part of our national debate. And whether that has to do with just, you know, equity issues, you say you're worried about the poor, well, then you have to worry about energy costs for the poor, right? If your issue is international relations, then you have to worry about what kind of political relationships or political constraints do we get into, because we're very dependent on overseas energy, right? If your issue is the environment, and that's the issue that's most important to you, you need to understand the environmental consequences of using one fuel versus another, right? And so in very many areas, right, energy really is a primary issue. And we have a professor on campus, Richard Smalley, who's a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, and he has this great slideshow, which I encourage you to go to his internet site and see. And he goes around to groups and he says, what do you think are the 10 biggest problems in the world? And, you know, people say poverty, lack of clean water, hunger. They list all these issues. And then he can show in his presentation that if you could solve the energy problem, if somebody came up with, one of you came up with a solar panel this big that for a dime could make enough energy to light a town, right? That you could desalinate water and you'd have plenty of clean water. That you could greenhouse food and manufacture food in a way that could feed more people. That you could withdraw the money from oil countries that use the money towards international terrorism. And he has this whole list he goes through, right? That if you could completely reduce the cost of energy, that you could solve a lot of other problems. And then he asked the audience, now look at these problems. If we solve world hunger, will that help with any of the other 8 problems? And he kind of shows that energy is the one that is the most interrelated of the 10. And if you could solve that one, you would have great influence on some of the other matters that are really deeply important to us.
Thank you so much, Amy. Yeah, you could spend a lifetime on the consequences of energy policy and how they tie in with every other issue. Marty Morrison. Marty, If you will stand up.
I am standing.
Oh, you are standing. Another small in stature but giant political figure. Marty is a well-known political activist. She also takes the fifth on how long she's been at this. Currently, Marty is the Associate Director of Community Outreach here in Harris County. Marty.
Thank you. What a pleasure it is to be here, and I'm feeling the energy, and it's so exciting to be here. Like most of the others, I grew up in politics. My father was very active. On weekends, when it was election time, my mom would leave the city, go up to our farm, because my father was canvassing the community in our old farm pickup truck with billboards with the old bullhorn going up and down the streets, reminding them to get out and vote and to vote for his candidate. I have been so fortunate in my lifetime that I have personally been able to sit and kind of voice my opinion in 5 seconds or less with 5 U.S. presidents: Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Bush I, Bill Clinton, George Bush II, Margaret Thatcher, Henry Kissinger, and Madeleine Albright. But at the age of 15 years of age, that will live in my heart and soul, I have the privilege to sit down with the unsinkable and the late Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. That is my hero. Last week, I had the opportunity to view the HBO special called The Iron-Jawed Angels. How many of you have been able to view that? Awesome. From the Iron-Jawed Angels, the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920 for the U.S. Constitution that gave us the right to vote. Gave me the opportunity to be an independent thinker, much to the dismays of my mother, but my father is so happy. Unfortunately, during the primaries, we have to be of one party. But in the general election, I vote my heart and my conscience. Every other month, I have the greatest opportunity that's ever been bestowed to me with the League of Women Voters that I am representing today, because I was recently elected to the board members as director of membership, and you can see me right afterwards, communications, citizenship, and our concerns on the environment. I viewed it that there was 33 women that went before us in 1917. They were brutally abused, mentally abused, and at the end of it, I was so astonished that the psychiatrist had the courage to stand up to President Woodrow Wilson and his cronies and to say that Alice Paul was strong and brave. That did not make her insane. Courage in women is often mistaken for insanity. No more. On August 26th, I celebrated Equality Day, and reflecting on the people that I have been so fortunate to meet and to give thanks for the 19th Amendment. I went online. I have friends in Washington. I started calling because, is this true? Is this true? Because I'm giving a speech, and I want my facts to be true. In the year of 2000, more than 20+ million eligible women did not vote in 2000. What really astonished me More than 15 million women didn't even bother to vote that year. How dare they? And I am a woman of independent means and voice. To me, that meant by the women not voting or not even registering, our voices, your voice, was not heard on issues of importance: education, health care, the economy, the environment, and Social Security, and on and on and on. You can bet I vote because health care is my #1 issue. Today I'm not standing because my legs are weak, but I am strong in conviction. I'm sorry, my speech is going too. I am a MS victim, proudly wear it. I've been diagnosed with it for 10 years, but I will not let it happen to me, that I will not be able to vote. That is something that can never be taken away from me. Let me tell you, in August of 26 of this year, I was privileged to be out at a press conference. And by the way, I just happened to work there also. So these are the latest stats. August 26, we have 1,866,000 registered voters. Of that number, 948,000, or 50%, were women. Of that number, 586,512, or 31.4, are aged between 18 and 34 years. And this also includes both gender. I'm here today to encourage each and every one of you to get involved. Make your voices heard. Get to know your candidates. Don't be afraid to meet them one-on-one in person, because we, as citizens of the United States, we hire them and we unhire them by this powerful little card here called your voter certificate. As part of my job, I visit high schools, campuses, any organization. I will come out to 10 or more people, and I will drive anywhere in this county to register people to vote. I speak to high schools, and I will come out and deputize those who are eligible to go out and register people in your community.
Thank you so much, Marty. What a courageous and passionate woman. Questions for Marty Morrison? Yes.
At the beginning of your speech, you talked about how...
Just 1 second, I think.
How women with opinions are often considered, or were considered insane, and now 80 years later, I guess the most prevalent example now is Teresa Heinz Kerry being called overly opinionated and being called crazy. So if it's 80 years later, what do you think we should be doing now to get rid of that stereotype?
And I am speaking of my opinion. Most of it's media hype. Make your own wise opinions, decisions. The media will pick up on anything that is newsworthy to them, and they too have their own opinions. I do not think that, Ms. Carey, and I know the women who are conscious voters do not think that, because we're all labeled with something.
Excellent question. You know, strong women get labeled in certain ways, don't they? Certainly that was the case as a trial lawyer. You know, you could be firm and be called something not very nice. Just as a man, being similarly firm would be just doing his job. So,
yes.
Very good question. Other questions for Marty? Yes.
In class the other day, I got into an argument with a male student who said that the women behind the men that are running for president and that have run for presidents, because we have had several resilient first ladies, he made the argument that they really don't matter, I guess is pretty much what he said. So I'm pretty opinionated, so we got into quite a
Good
fight.
for you.
And I would like to know, I obviously disagree with that. I think that you can tell a lot about a man by his wife and, her opinions and stuff like that. So I'd like to get your opinion on that.
Well, and you will have my opinion. It takes a strong woman to stand behind a strong man. We're all human. We all make mistakes. But if a woman truly believes in her husband, her brother, uncle, whomever, they both have to have the same qualities in family, in issues. And I stand strong behind Mayor White. I had the greatest opportunity during his campaign. Wherever he was, I was usually right there behind him. And I had the opportunity so many times to speak with all the candidates because I was there to do volunteer deputy or voting registrars. And how fortunate we are to have Andrea as our First Lady of Houston. You have to believe. You have to believe in that person. And when your heart and your mind are in sync, that man is so lucky to have you standing behind him. And it's mostly opinionated anyway.
One more question. Okay, very quickly.
Well, I think this is just a question for all of us here as women.
Right.
We can all help and support and help someone win. What can we do as women to get into those positions ourselves? It's something to be, the wife of a president. It's something else to be the president yourself, to make a change. Because I believe women are the best managers, whether people like it or not. But that's just the truth.
We are the only species that we can make doctor's appointments, change babies, drive the car, be on the cell phone, and put on makeup at the same time and not have an accident. My God, we have the best example right here is State Rep Martha Wong. It is get involved, know your issues, have conviction, be willing to get out and work, do the block walking, know your areas, know your communities, and just be ready and stand firm. Put your feet in the ground and be ready to be hit from all sides. But be ready, think on your feet, and be prepared. And know that you are the person that you are. Love yourself and be proud of yourself every day that you are able to wake up and put your feet on the ground and walk outside.
Absolutely. Marty, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Well, very quickly, you've heard that Dr. Quillin ate politics at her family's dinner table and at her university dorm table. Sharia's family was involved in the Montgomery bus boycotts. Martha Wong is the immigrant dream. Amy Jaffe's mother saved a pond in Squamsit, Massachusetts. All right, Amy's mom.
Yay.
And politics coursing through her blood. Marty Morrison, pardon me there, as our own iron-jawed angel.
Oh, well,
we
thank
are
you.
so fortunate to have these speakers with us today. They have made and continue to make our community a better place to live. Thank you. We are so grateful, too, to the students who are here today, Rice, and especially University of Houston and TSU students who came all the way over. And by the way, your buses are leaving at 1:45, so it's time to eat. These women who spoke to you today make a difference, and you can too. You can too. I repeat that. You can too. And you can begin today and get somebody else involved as well. So continue the discussion. You've got great resources at your table. There are table manner monitors watching you. No, they're just teasing about that. And thank you, Baker Institute, so much.